Louis Westheimer, who was a grandson of Samuel Westheimer, visited Rimbach in 1984. He was speaking to the secretary in the office of the mayor, and that secretary said, well, wait a minute, I have a lot of information on the Jews of Rimbach, and pulled this book in German, this booklet, out of a drawer. He brought it home and had it translated into English, and distributed it to any number of people, obviously a number of people on this call, but not all. So let me talk a little bit about the Jews of Rimbach in the early 1800s, where our ancestors, Lesser and Bessel, lived with their children, some of whom are, well, direct ancestors. There may have been Jews in this region as early as the 1500s. They were peddlers of minor, trashy stuff because they were not permitted in any other kind of work. So they wandered through the area. The first recorded Jewish residence of Rimbach was recorded as Moshe the Jew. There were also people a few years later called Jew Hayam, Jew this, Jew that. They had no last names. Greg, will you also bring in that yellow pad? All the stuff that's in there. In 1808, Germany was not a unified country at that point. It had dukedoms, and the Duke of Hessen was this region, required that Jews take German surnames in 1808. Many of the names were place names, and I sort of Googled German towns called Freiburg, Friedenberg, Ginsburg, all the people we know, this Heimer and that Heimer, and Westheim turns out to be about 120 miles from Rimbach. So that gives us a probable thought on how that name came around. And in fact, our great-grandmother, Sarah, Ferdinand's wife, her last name was Flarsheim, and there's a Flarsheim about 30 miles from Rimbach. So you can start to sort of see a pattern how they might have been brought together, having been from a similar region. In the region, there was quite a significant Jewish population. That may be an exaggeration, but 10 to 14% of the population in the early 1800s was Jewish. The numbers are still pretty small, in the hundreds, but it was thought of as being a popular, commonplace for Jews to live at that point. So this is a map of.
Sorry, Sallie. Karina said she's waiting in the waiting room and needs to be let back in.
Oh, Greg, you have to let Karina in. I'm sorry, I thought. Shoot. Let me wait just a minute, and since we're jumping around computers. So an interesting thing we saw in a photo in another book that we have is the blue lines in the center of streets were canals. They were very narrow canals, but there was water flowing through down Main Street in Rimbach. Let me see if Karina is on. Yes, hi. Welcome, Karina. Sorry for, we had rather bumbling problems with technology, but I think we're on target now. So glad to have you.
Hi, thank you so much. Yes, I had the same.
Okay, so the greenhouses on this little map, and the center is Main Street. The greenhouses are the buildings and homes owned by Jews in Rimbach in, I believe, around 1840. Pressing the down arrow. Okay. Okay. Jews were not at this point citizens in Germany. They began to grant citizenship in some of the regions, but it was very slow in this area. So in order to have some security, Jews paid protection fees to the Duke in order to be able to live, work, attend services, and so forth. To get protection, you needed a certain amount of money, and it was actually quite a bit of money. You needed to be able to read and write in German, and you needed to have a good reputation. Lesser is listed as paying fees these protection fees. In addition, every Jew, whether you had protection or not, had to pay a Jew fee, and you had to pay border fees. Only the Jewish population, not anybody else, when you crossed from one region to another. It said in this book that often the Jews traveling from area to area would have the Christians take their cattle or materials across these borders, and they would go in areas where there were not toll collectors to save these sometimes exorbitant fees. Jews were very limited in occupations, primarily trading. They were allowed really almost only to be traders. They couldn't own land they could own land, but they couldn't be farmers. They couldn't participate in skilled trades. So primarily they were limited to trading. And traded in Rimbach pretty much everything you can think of: general store, hides of cattle. In fact, they were 85% of the cattle traders in Rimbach were Jewish. So the first known Westheimers of Rimbach are, as I said, Lesser and Bessel. They're spelled in various ways in various documents with umlauts and Germanic letters. The house was near the very center of the city, that main street that I was showing you on the map. In fact, right there is their house. You can see 4 houses in a row there that are owned by Jews, and we are right there on this street. Lesser and Bessel had 9 children. I have a question mark here because in the book, The Jews of Rimbach, only 8 are listed, but we know there was another brother, David, who came to the US with Ferdinand, so we're adding him in. So 3 were known to stay, the oldest 2 sons and the firstborn daughter. 3 immigrated to the US, David, Ferdinand, and Samuel, and 3 are a bit of a mystery. One is actually named Samuel, and Lewis speculated that there was an earlier Samuel who died in infancy, and their next born child was also then named Samuel. The 2 oldest immigrated to the US in 1845. Ferdinand was 20, and 3 years later, Samuel came. He was only 15 when he came alone to the US. They were peddlers and sold things in the New York, New Jersey area, and ended up in St. Joseph, Missouri in 1859 and 1860. They started their liquor business, which is one of the things that we all seem to know a bit about, not until 1870. there is so much to know, and Nate Westheimer has been a particular student of their lives, and Anne knows a great deal also. And if people want, maybe you guys would do another more organized presentation on their lives in the US, because this is all I'm saying at this time about that. So I mentioned that we were going to Germany. We did a little research on Rimbach. Lewis, in his introduction to the book, wrote that, I'm going to say it here exactly, that that the synagogue that was there had been burned to the ground, and that the cemetery there was abandoned, unkempt, and unkept. There was vandalism everywhere, headstones disfigured, turned over, and thrown about. Weeds and tall grass littered the paths between half-hidden graves. This made us think, why exactly would we go there if there's no synagogue, the cemetery is inaccessible, and who knows what else? So I went on the website of the town and wrote to the mayor, the Burgermeister, Holger Schmidt, who immediately responded, and we started a great correspondence. The phone a number of times. He speaks perfect English. He has some relatives in Pennsylvania, I think. So we went. He said there were things to see, and he would show us around. So here is our Burgermeister. He was a investment banker in the nearby city of Mannheim until he had been from Rimbach all of his life and decided to enter politics, and has been the mayor for about a dozen years. It's a full-time job. It's not a volunteer thing. So he is there. We met him in his office, which is called the Rathaus or Rathaus. That's the word for city hall in German. And he presented us with these two books. The book on the left is a history of Rimbach and has, a half a dozen pages on the Jewish history in Rimbach, and otherwise it's all the rest. Of course, these are in German. The book on the right is Our Jews of Rimbach book, bound and redone and updated in 1987, I believe. I'll talk about that a little bit more later. So the first thing we did after meeting with Holger is went to the synagogue, which was in no way burnt down. Here it is, except for the steeple, exactly as it was when it was built in 1840, the same building. During Kristallnacht, 1938, the inside was totally destroyed, all the artifacts stolen or taken away, but the building is exactly as it was. I wanted to point out that a little plaque on the front that you can see to the right of the door, and also the archway over the door for a moment. This is the plaque right on the Catholic Church, which talks about the synagogue being erected in 1840, damaged and abandoned in 1938, and became a Catholic church in 1951. Also over the door is some Hebrew. I don't know who on this call can read Hebrew. I decided it said what our synagogue when we were growing up said, which is, "This house shall be a house of prayer for all people."
It looks like the Shema. Shema
the Shema.
Yisrael, Adonai
Okay.
Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Yeah.
Betsy, wow. Thank you. I don't have to make it up anymore.
Nope.
Okay, about a block or two from this synagogue was a little park where they have a plaque, I don't want to say commemorating, but honoring and talking about the Holocaust and the Jews of this community. In this park is also this very interesting little child-made tiles on a display that was commissioned, supported, guided by a woman named Ruth Oppenheimer, who was a resident of Rimbach and left on one of the kinder transports that took where parents put their kids on trains to go to Switzerland or England or other places to protect them during the rise of the Nazis. She came back to the town and worked with the children at the school to make this memorial to the children who were taken on the kinder transport. So here's a picture of the main street with the canal. It was Main Street when they lived there, or Hauptstrasse. It became Kaiser Wilhelm Strasse. Then it became Adolf Hitler Strasse. And now it is Rathausstrasse. This is a view looking one direction, and I want you to sort of look to the right, which is where the key houses were that I'm going to talk about. So this is flipped the other way, and the houses that you see on the left, the white, the yellow, and the sort of peach-colored beige are 3 Jewish homes. Yeah, Dick.
Was the canal for transport water, or was it a sewer?
We think it was quite narrow, and so we think sewer. But we're just guessing that. We don't know. It was not wide enough for any sort of boat. Yeah, quite narrow, I think. Given that there were cattle markets along this road, I wonder maybe if it had to, again, probably sewage is my best guess. So here are these 3 houses again. You can see the first 2 share a roof. The first one you have to climb steps to get up to it. And those are just some of the features that I wanted to point out. The third house has 3 windows across the top, a double, a single that you can't see behind the sign, and another double. Here are those 3 houses. This is an undated photo, but I'm guessing it was around 1900. The first 2 say that they're retail establishments. The second one sells leather. The first one, general goods. And these names, Wetterhahn and Weichel, as Nate knows, kind of related by marriage, are 2 of the Jewish homes. The third one is the home of Lesser and Bessel and their children. It is, by the way, 2 doors down from the current City Hall. Here's that same view of those with the raised steps and so forth, exactly as they were. Greg was very skeptical about whether all these years later that those were really the same houses, but they look almost identical. I'm sure.
Having seen these pictures.
Yeah, after having looked at this closely. I don't know if there's yes, there is another picture. So this is our family house that we are standing in front of. It currently is a kebab and pizza restaurant. It's called City Donner. Donner is the name of kebabs in much of Europe, but in Germany. So pretty thrilling, I felt, to be standing there at their house. Greg stuck this into my PowerPoint presentation. We were off then to the cemetery. That was our next stop. And Holger couldn't find the little road, a little farm road that went up to the cemetery. So we went to a city maintenance facility to get directions. And the people were so nice, and they insisted that I get up in the truck. And so there I am on the Rimbach truck. here we are in front of the cemetery. We did find it. This is the original wall built in 1840. The cemetery is locked and is under the auspices of a cemetery association that oversees cemeteries throughout the region, Jewish cemeteries. The mayor had to get a key for us to be able to go in, and so he got the key, and he arranged for his maintenance crew to go in and cut the grass. So that was pretty cool. So I want to.
We will be contributing to his next.
Yes, his next campaign. I'll contribute to his campaign. So the plaque on the wall on the right of the picture here is reproduced here. These are the Jews of Rimbach who were killed in the Holocaust. You see a number of Westheimers, Weischels, Wetterhans, the names all. Oppenheimer, a name very much in the news right now, from this community. We were interested that almost all of them were born. I see a Herbert Weischel was born in 1922, but most were born in 1890s, 80s, 70s, 60s. So these were older people. And I think there's 2 generations missing from here. My guess is that the people in their 40s and 50s, 30s and 20s left before this with their young children. Some went on the kinder transport, and mainly the people who were left were the older citizens. Okay, so here's inside this lovely, really lovely cemetery. And so it doesn't, for us, it didn't match up at all with Lewis's description. Holger felt that in his lifetime, he's in his 50s, he had never heard about vandalism of the cemetery. So somewhere in the last 180 years, it had what was, well, less than that. I mean, there's some erosion, there are roots, there were no trees in an earlier picture I saw. There are lots of reasons why the gravestones might have toppled over, but it really, there were not cracks in them. They were in wonderful shape. And you can see what a beautiful spot this was up on a hill. Not going to the next. I see some comments in the chat, and if somebody would check that to see if there's any questions I should be paying attention to. Oh, maybe I need to check here. Okay. We were given this map of the cemetery. Every one of those graves is identified and associated with a particular person. So we were able to find Lesser and Bessel's graves right off the bat. I mean, we wandered around a little, we looked at the others. All of them have Hebrew on them. And so we couldn't really tell exactly, we couldn't prove in this case, this middle one is Lesser's gravestone. As it was marked on the map. We couldn't read it, of course, but then we went to Bessel's, and hers was in Hebrew also on the front. I walked around the back, looked very closely, and saw her name. Yeah, the German font that we're so familiar with. And I can't tell you how thrilled I was at that moment to know for absolutely certain that this is where my great-great-grandmother was buried. Dick? You
No,
just
I was just wiping a tear from my eye.
No. So I wanted to comment again on this book, the new version of The Jews of Rimbach, which has some very different things in it, although it's essentially the same as what we have. It's if only I could read German. It's much more readable, legible. The photos are clear. The organization is better. And this is a statement in the beginning. In September 1985, this was a year after Lewis went, the Municipal Council of Rimbach decided unanimously to remember the 50th anniversary of the Reichskristallnacht as a reminder and warning, and to record an essential aspect of Rimbach's history under National Socialism. The council recommended that Wolfgang Gebhardt's manuscript, which was written in 1965, be revised and published as a book. This book also fulfills the wish of the municipal council not to open wounds that have since healed, but to recognize that confrontation with history is necessary. And without this history, the truth would not be told. Dealing with the history of National Socialism is an ongoing task. Forgetting and repressing will make possible a repetition of this terrible epoch of our history. May this book help sharpen our historical awareness and keep it awake so that freedom and human dignity can never again be trampled underfoot.
Amen.
Amen. So that's an overview. We have read a lot more and have a sense about particularly the protection. I forgot to mention that protection was extended to the firstborn son, to the person who earned it, and that person's firstborn son. And they were a little casual about letting other sons also pay protection. I think it is very possible that David, Ferdinand, and Samuel left in part for opportunity. There was a big wave of European Jews coming to America during that period, but also because they could not be citizens and they probably could not be granted protection like their older brothers. So I don't know that for a fact, but I can't help but believe that this protection thing played a factor. By the way, Jews became full citizens in 1848. So about only 3 or 4 years after our family left. So I want to see what questions.
Yeah, you can stop sharing.
Okay, how do I?
Stop sharing.
Okay, let's go back to the
No, it's
Zoom.
okay.
There we go, the Zoom. Okay, to see all of your lovely faces.
And everybody here.
Tom, you have a question. Were who ethnically different?
I asked two things. How did they know who was Jew and who was German? And were the Jews ethnically from a different area of Europe that they would be identifiable other than maybe dress? Or how do you spot a Jew?
Well, my assumption is that they were different in many ways. They spoke primarily Hebrew. If they spoke German, it was with an accent. They stuck together in their community as minorities do. I don't think there was any question that they identified themselves as Jewish. I'm trying to look at the.
So where did they come from if they weren't from that area?
The sense was in the earlier centuries, they were more or less nomads. So they may have been in the area, but not with permanent places to live. Dick?
Yeah,
can
so
just speak.
so Tom, imagine all through Eastern Europe, from Germany east and north, the Jews were constantly every few generations being driven from whatever communities they were in. And so, for instance, in the middle 1600s, Jews were driven out of what is now Ukraine into Lithuania and Germany. And then a century later, they were driven out of Lithuania and Poland and into Ukraine. And it's one of the reasons why Yiddish is a common language, because there was never there was never sort of a certainty and identification with a geographic region because of the uncertainty of being there. This was basically since the 10th century. It wasn't a nomadic, it was a settled and then driven out lifestyle, a life, because of the persecution. And it was intensified after the era of Martin Luther, who sort of created sort of an institutionalized anti-Jewish sort of bias throughout the region. But before that, it was just like the way populists take it. Jews were blamed for the plague because why not? And so they were driven from people where there were that. It was not nomadic. It was settled and then driven out.
So other thoughts are, do I pronounce it Karina or Karina, right? Is that right?
Yeah, Karina's fine.
Thanks. Now you also went to Rimbach, and I would love to have you talk about it.
I did. It's so magical to see your photos, because I've been going through mine all day today. And just, tearing up, the same as Dick said, that it's just so beautiful. So I went in 2010 after I was very close with my grandmother, Betsy's mom, Granny Sue, who most of you know. I think a lot of us know. So I was visiting Granny Sue and Regine Ransohoff at one point, and they reviewed the trip that they had taken to Germany in, I think it was the 80s, late 80s, early 90s. And they had taken it together with Jerry and Billy. And they had gone to all of the Ransohoff graves and all of the Westheimer graves and cleaned them and went to visit the homes. And so they, at the time, I remember sitting in Regine's living room, and they just poured all of this information out to me. And so I recreated the exactly same trip, along with a few months of working on some farms in Spain and visiting friends and family. So I remember, I had started in Peckelsheim and Paderborn and North Westphalia, visiting the Ransohoff graves and visiting my great grandfather's home in Paderborn, so on the Ransohoff side, and then got to Rimbach. And I'll never forget it, because I arrived on my own. I was 25 years old in this like little German town. I only knew how to say Jewish cemetery. That was the only German I knew how to say. And so the only thing across from the bus stop was, I think it was like a little pub. And so I walked in, and everybody's kind of buzzing. And I'm, sitting there, like coming up to the bar, asking if anybody knows where like the Judith or Friedhof is. And everyone's like, have a beer. Like, Germany is playing England in the World Cup. Like, sit down. Like, we'll handle you in like a few minutes. And so sat me down. I'm sitting there with my little beer. And then Germany wins. And the whole of Rimbach like explodes. There's like people cheering and driving through. It was just like a huge celebration. And the caretaker of the cemetery happened to either be there or was like walking by. And so he drove me up, and we spent the day there. And I have a couple pictures. I don't necessarily need, they're similar to yours. I took pictures of all of them, but he was wonderful and took me up in his little maintenance truck and just let me hang out as long as I want. And, I think I had like a bucket and a sponge and just, I mean, he was a caretaker, so I didn't really have to do much, but it's a beautiful, just as you said, Sallie, it's a beautiful, magical place on a hill, and the way the sun kind of dapples over the trees and dapples over everything is really beautiful. And then after, I think it was the day before, the day after, I'm looking at my old journals, but I went to Dachau, where Granny Sue and Regine also went, and so left stones, near the gates, and I sort of recreated the same trip that they took. So it's wonderful to be able to remember it.
By the way, we also went to Dachau on this trip, and we also did major Jewish tour and exploration in Amsterdam. So
Yeah.
I am not observant or participate in Judaism at home, but when I go to Europe, like, I'm a super Jew when I go there. I know everything. I look into everything. I study everything. Can you tell us, what was the shape of the cemetery when you were there?
It was great. I mean, the pictures are very similar of mine. And so there was some some like moss and like lichen growing, and I think maybe a little bit of like what is it, lime kiln, where it's like scaled, like a little salt buildup. But it was beautiful. I mean, I think just like you said as well, that there was some things that had toppled over, but none of it seemed vandalized at all. It was in wonderful shape. And the town, my experience in Germany in general was that when you, of course, walking into anywhere and asking where the Jewish cemetery is like slightly awkward, but everyone was so welcoming and just said, like, welcome. Like, we really do our best to make sure that Jewish people feel welcome. And like, everyone was wonderful showing me the cemeteries that I went to. So no, it was in great shape, and everybody in the town was wonderful.
That's very good. I put off going to Germany. We went as a family when we were, I don't know how old, Ann and Dick. How old were you? Dick was a teenager.
I was 15.
15, so we were 20 and 21. Other than that, Greg and I travel a great deal, and I have never wanted to go to Germany. The sound of the language sort of puts me off the whole thing, but I found what you found, that people there really want to deal with their bad history. They want to talk about it. It's mandatory education in the schools, and the guides that we had here and there in Germany really wanted to make statements to American travelers. One in particular, I did tear up as he talked about how he feels about the Americans who came in, this wasn't a Jewish guide, but liberated the camps and really freed them from the evil that beset them. And it was very moving. I know he was speaking to mostly Americans, and so he wanted to say the right thing, but it seemed extremely heartfelt. And as somebody said, or several of you said in the chat, it's especially striking right now in America as we try to cover up and erase our own bad history. Yeah, John. Unmute yourself. Oh, you don't look muted.
Oh, I did. No, I have an outside thing that was muted. Hi, thank you. So good to be here. One of the things I've asked Anne about this, and I don't know whether there was anything that you may have unearthed or knew about, or anybody else, about whether Samuel Ben and Ferdinand, who were the three that came?
David and Ferdinand. David, by the way, let me just
yeah.
here, is a big mystery to me and to many of us. But I'll come back to that in a minute. Go ahead.
Yeah. Was there anything that anybody has unearthed about correspondence of those three, or even Sarah, writing back to any of the people in Germany and corresponding with them? Because from what Anne has said and from what I've been able to find, there's really nothing. There's actually one story of Joseph Ransohoff going back to Germany and spending some time there, but there seems to be very, very little exchange or connection with ancestry that was cultivated by the German Jews that came over, or at least the ones that I know, the Westheimers and Ransohoffs, back to the people that they left. And I'm wondering if you had seen and if you
I know
found
only
anything.
one small thing, and that was Samuel, I think in his obituary or something, reported that he went back, but probably within the first 10 years that he was in the US. So he went back to visit his parents. Nate, you know an enormous amount about this. What do you know what do you say to John's question?
I say that we have, at least that I know of, hints that there was continued communication, and those would be, for instance, all three of them got passports to go back to Germany, within 10 years of coming over here. So I think that accounts for Samuel's account of going back. And then one of their older brothers had a son, I think it was Isaac's son, Jacob, who came over, lived with them in St. Joseph, stayed in close touch. So, that they had a nephew that was a big part of their American life, I think would also indicate that they were still, in touch to some degree.
Oh, along those same lines, Ferdinand, in some article or other that we read, gave a donation to the needy Jews of Rimbach, which was sent to and administered by one of his nephews. So I don't know whether it was the same one. We'll have to look at that article, but clearly there was some connection that remained. I think it was a pretty big chunk of money for along those lines. Jenny, did you have a question? I was just reading some body language, but I was reading it wrong. Any other thing to share, information? Does anybody know?
Could reiterate that, and this is
Say it loud.
Karina's comment too.
Yeah.
It's definitely.
Oh yeah,
Any of
Karina. Yes. So I think we would, if you find yourself in that part of the world, it was very we didn't know what we would find, and we were downplaying it to everybody we were with, saying, we're just going to check this out. We don't know. We have very low expectations. Well, it substantially exceeded our expectations, both in what we saw, in how kind people were. And I'm not a very emotional person about that kind of thing, but it was very moving.
Yeah, I mean, I was at the time when I went, I think 25, and I'm like a clinical social worker. I'm pretty chatty with anyone, just like to chit chat. But at the time, I was also, I was at a time of my life where, there wasn't a huge chunk of money that I was traveling with. So I was doing ride shares and couch surfing, and it was sort of a different time where I wasn't, traveling, I would say very privately. Like I was sleeping on strangers' couches and getting rides with them. And I have this all, I was reading my journal today and I was like, oh my God, I would never do that. And every conversation and every journal entry that I wrote during that time was very, I would agree, it was very emotional and very sort of empathic, that people really wanted to dig into the history with you and really wanted to talk about it and process that it wasn't buried at all. And I found that really eye-opening as well at such a young age of you sort of, I didn't really know what to expect either, but I wasn't shy about it because I didn't know to be shy about it at the time, but I think I would be more shy now. But yeah, it was wonderful. It was a great experience.
So any other thoughts or questions or wish to know what happened to the boys when they got here. I mean, we're what happened to the boys when they got here, but a little bit more of their journey from landing in New York and finding their way to St. Joe. There are a few of you. Anne is a genius with the family tree. Nate has read everything he can get his hands on. Greg goes down deep rabbit holes on newspapers.com looking for articles that mention them. And so
I'd
don't
love
know.
to know more if anybody wants to share.
Nate, could you share some of the New York State stuff and that is so fascinating?
Yeah, sure. And there was just like two things that I was also kind of reacting to in terms of your presentation, Sally. That one was just this idea of them getting the last name. I think one perspective that reading the Jews of Rimbach kind of gave me was, I think in the past I had heard this story of finally getting a last name, and I thought of it as sort of like maybe an indication like of a liberalization of Germany. And I think reading the book, what I came to, and I've done no additional reading on this, so I'm sure there's historians and sociologists who actually know the answer to this. But I came away with the perception that it was more like a tattoo, like from the Holocaust. It was a way of tracking trade, of tracking movement, of we need to keep track of these Jews. So we need to give them a last name, because then, the book goes into, we need to require that they use that name in all transactions. We need to require that they use that name, in all trade. So it kind of changed my perspective on the getting the name. Didn't sound that great after all.
During the first half of the 19th century, areas around Germany were granting more and more citizen-like activities for Jews, but in fact, there's one point where I see that some of the Jews of Rimbach were granted citizenship, but Lesser was not. For some reason, he did not. You had to pay. If you were Jewish, you had to pay in those days to become a citizen. And I don't know why Lesser, who seemed to have some resources, was not made a citizen, I think, until 1848, whereas some of the others were. Okay, Nate, you.
Yeah, well, then the other one was cattle trade, and this goes to kind of the New York story a little bit, or any of the diving deep into the newspaper archives that folks have done. And just that you notice that if you start to collide with other Westheimer branches when you're researching our Westheimers, you see a lot of cattle trade in the U.S. And actually, like in the newspapers, is just sort of the pollution of this one sort of branch of Westheimers that were in upstate New York and were in areas where our Westheimers were. So it's just interesting that they were sort of forced to do cattle trade in Germany, Jews in general, and then of course that's what they do well when they come here, and you see a lot of evidence of that. So the data that Dick's referring to is sort of the big question is what happens between getting here in 47 and moving out to St. Joseph in 59, because you start to see really good data of them existing in, with the census in 1860, and then newspaper articles starting in 62. So it's like there's this big gap of time that I find the most sort of interesting, which is their peddler years. And this is just on familysearch.org. You'll find it if you search yourself. There's a land record in upstate New York of an F. Westheimer, no, a Ferdinand. I think in one record it's a Ferdinand, the other one they write him down as Frederick, buying a plot of land with a Max Epstein, 2 Ps. And again, there's lots of pollution in terms of Westheimers around that time. So the way that you know this is him is later on, you find that Samuel Westheimer's partner in the groceries business was a Max Epstein. And you later see those same Epsteins out in St. Joseph. And I thought, you know, one wild thing is they bought this farm in upstate New York, like the year prior to moving out to St. Joseph, which just seems like, you know, what's the story there? You've obviously taken about a decade to save money and, you know, pull yourself up by your peddler straps, and then it culminates in being able to buy property, and then you up and leave. Did they know that they were going to leave? What was the purpose of that property? And unfortunately, the property was purchased in a town that is mostly underwater at this point. There's a big dam that was installed there. So, and it's unclear the way that they write these deeds. You know, it's like 10 steps from so-and-so's house. And if you want to figure out where that is, you have to read the entirety of the deed book, and sort of, it would take, I talked to the county up there, and they're like, yeah, it would be impossible to stitch together where this is, but there's a greater than 50% chance that it's not even here anymore. Because they definitely referenced the stream that was dammed. So it's very, very likely if it was above the dam, which it probably was, it's not there anymore. But
Nate,
anyway, I think, yeah.
Do you know the county in upstate New York where it is? Like what the name of it
yeah,
is?
I can. The town is Gilboa. I think that's how you say it.
Huh.
Yeah. So the county is Schoharie County. I'll just drop a Google Maps.
So Schoharie County is south of Albany.
I have a cabin, like probably like 25 miles from there.
Yeah, I wish I had known about this before, because that one time I went to Cooperstown, I could have easily.
I'll write to you about that later. That's very
okay. Yeah, so you'll see there's a big old dam, dammed up creek, and that's what they bought land on. So it's unlikely that the land is still there. But anyway, I thought that part was interesting, that they bought this property and they bought it in upstate New York, and then it was so close to when they left town, and it just yeah, I wonder what its purpose was. It's also 15 miles from where Samuel did not, well, we don't know if he eventually became a peddler, but for the most part, at least while he was up there, he was an apprentice at a tin shop. So in the New York State 1855 census, Samuel is 10 miles away from where they bought the farm, 15 miles away from where they bought the farm. Years later, as an apprentice at a tin shop.
So in my lifetime,
Bill.
I went to school in Schenectady, New York, which is just north of Schoharie County. And my parents came to visit, and they said, we want to go visit this farm that's the Westheimer farm. And so that was in the early 70s. Could I remember any more? No, but
It was a dairy farm, wasn't it?
I think it was, yeah, which is common in that area. So there's your cattle, they're the Westheimers, and it existed in the 1970s, and we went and visited them.
So did they claim that it was like, because I have also seen this, but I've tracked it back to this other branch of Westheimers, and I'm wondering if
I have no idea.
I'm wondering if they had a knowledge of it just because it was like,
Well, they
you know,
Googled.
like it would be fun to drink a Westheimer beer sometime, even though we know that's not.
My
the same.
recollection was that they said they were not part of our family. that they were a
Okay.
different branch.
I
of
know
West-
Which, by the way, Tom had a question about the Texas Westheimers. Anne, anybody want to answer what you know about that?
What I know about that. Well, I used to be in touch with David Westheimer a lot. He wrote Von Ryan's Express. He's the Texas Westheimer. He's got a son who was in the in LA, maybe a couple kids in LA who were producers, art producers or managers or
I'm in touch with Cody, he's a composer.
yeah. But
Okay.
so he's a grandson of David,
But
I think.
there are no really.
But what I know most about David, I mean, he would correspond, Grandpa corresponded with him. And then I corresponded with him. I have no friggin' idea. I have some notes from him. And we just know that we're not the same Westheimers. But part of that family is in LA now.
I
So-
did a little research into that family, and it's eerily similar to our family's style of actions and behaviors and beliefs. That they moved there and became this. They had a farm and became the leader of the community and created a school for all the children, regardless of whether they were Jewish or not. And so it doesn't mean that we're related, but it's sort of an interesting parallel.
Grandpa had a lot of conversation back and forth with David, and I used to have letters and don't know that I have them anymore.
I spoke with David too. When I spoke with him, he was in LA. He was, it was toward the end of his life.
Yeah.
He was very disappointed in the whole publishing world because he couldn't, here's this guy, he had bestsellers, he couldn't get a book published. That was how I connected with him. And I used to communicate with Cody, so that's nice to get an update on him. Thank you.
So I have grandpa's copy of Von Ryan Express, which was not signed, but he signed a book that he wrote to me, and he just said to cousin Ann with all good wishes, David Westheimer. So
Nice.
that's as close as I can get to be.
Great.
read that.
So I would, I just want to, I do want to wind up. John R., I'm so glad you were able to stay a while, and want to encourage those of you who, like Gabe has been to St. Joe, I know, and several others of you have. And if anybody wants to put their heads together and talk about life after landing in the US in a little bit more detail, I bet this crowd would enjoy another Zoom call. At least I would, for sure.
Well, at the very least, I'd like to see all these faces again, because this is very cool to see all the faces and to see everybody, to have all these family members together from different branches, different this, it's very cool.
I agree, Anne. It's really good to see everybody.
Yeah, I like it.
Mom or Aunt Sally, if someone would send whatever like most simple family tree that you have, that would be very helpful to me.
I would be happy to, and then maybe I will bring it.
Related to this today, like all the names that were thrown out.
I have to
Yeah.
say goodbye to a guest that was here. Thank you so much, everyone.
John, great to see you.
Great
Good to see you. And I really want to join the next meeting too. I'm very interested in life in the US.
Yes.
Great.
Sally, could you print or send a PDF of your PowerPoint to all of us?
Yes, would be glad to. And I'm going to send it to Holger too. I decided to sort of wait till after tonight to get back in touch with him. Of course, I sent him thank you notes and
Along with the big check for his campaign.
Yeah, no, and some, I don't think he will have any trouble getting reelected. He's very well loved there. Every place we went, people, every citizen wanted to talk to him. There are about 9,000 people who live in Rimbach now. By the way, probably 1,000 when our relatives live there. So yes, I will send this all out. I'll nudge those of you who know more about life in the US and see if we can't get the crowd together again. Any other questions or thoughts that people have?
Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Sally. I always
Thank you,
question,
Sally.
I question why you keep saying that David was a mystery to you, because he's always been on a family tree that I've had.
Well, we know that Samuel and Ferdinand were in business together. Samuel and Ferdinand both became president of the bank. Samuel and Ferdinand, this and that. And if you Google just generally on newspapers.com to try to find out a little bit more about him, he's very absent compared to the other two. Very, very little about him. I learned more about him from his widow Babette's obituary than anything about him in particular. So that's why I say that about him.
Thank you. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Okay.
Sallie, for putting all this together, and I hope we can keep in touch by email with everyone as well and share anything we discover.
And do a Zoom again so we can see
I'll tell you
everybody.
what was really fun is we started this, then we had lunch out at Dick and Debbie's with Nate, and he knew so much, and that was so cool. And then sent this to Betsy, and he told us about Karina's experience. And I bet the more we sort of put the word out, the more people have bits of knowledge and experience that would really be fun to hear about.
Thank you. Thank you
So,
for
yeah,
including me.
thanks.
Thanks.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Great.
Thank
Hope to
you.
see you
Hi,
soon.
guys.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Glad you got that working.
Sallie, save the recording and upload it to YouTube. If you need help, let me know.
I'll tell her.
Okay,
I don't know why she's not on here, but I'll tell her.
great.
Okay. Oh, there's Greg. Greg, listen to Tom. Tell Greg again. Can you hear us, Greg? I'll tell her.
Yeah, go ahead.
Tom has something to say.
You can save the audio and upload it to video and upload it to YouTube and make it private if you want or public. If you need help, let me know.
Yeah,